It was a warm, sunny day in October when I decided to take a solo hike through the dense forest behind my family's cabin. The vibrant autumn foliage painted the landscape in a breathtaking palette of reds, oranges, and yellows. Little did I know that my day would end in terror. As I trekked deeper into the woods, I stumbled upon an old hidden trail. Curiosity piqued. I decided to venture down this new path. The farther I went, the more the forest seemed to close in around me, casting a shadow of unease over my journey. After hours of walking, the trail led me to a clearing with an enormous wind-outless concrete building. Razor wire fences and security cameras surrounded the structure. A faded sign above the entrance read, "Restricted area, authorized personnel only." My heart raced as I stared at the ominous building, a sense of dread creeping over me. Despite my instincts screaming at me to turn back, I couldn't resist the allure of discovering what lay within. Finding a weak spot in the fence, I squeezed through and approached the entrance. The door was locked, but an open vent at the base of the wall offered a point of entry. I crawled through the dark, claustrophobic space, my breath shallow and shaky. I emerged in a dimly lit hallway lined with heavy metal doors. The air was stale and a low hum vibrated through the walls. It felt like the building was alive, pulsating with some kind of unnatural energy. I cautiously opened the nearest door, revealing a small room with a single chair in the center. A strange machine was mounted to the wall, its purpose unclear. I felt it shiver down my spine and closed the door, moving on to the next room. This one contained a row of glass chambers, each housing a human figure suspended in a viscous green liquid. I gasped in horror as I realized these people were part of some monstrous experiment. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in a place where the line between life and death was blurred. As I moved through the facility, I came across several rooms where different experiments were being performed. Each room was more horrifying than the last, revealing the depths to which the government was willing to go in their attempts to contact the afterlife. In one room, I saw a team of scientists huddle around a large glass chamber. Inside, a man was strapped to a table, electrodes attached to his temples. His eyes were wide with terror, and his body convulsed as electric currents surged through him. I could see his brain activity spike and then plummet, as if they were trying to push him to the brink of death and bring him back again, over and over. I could only imagine the agony he was experiencing, trapped between life and death. Another room contained an even more chilling sight. Here a group of individuals lay on gurneys, their heads encased in strange helmet-like devices. Tubes connected the helmets to a massive machine that emitted a low, ominous hum. As I watched, the expressions on the subjects' faces shifted from serenity to sheer terror. It was as though they were being forced to experience nightmarish visions of the afterlife, their minds subjected to unimaginable horrors. I also came across a room that appeared to be a laboratory dedicated to the study of psychic phenomena. Several subjects sat in chairs, their heads encased in metallic helmets connected to a network of computers. They stared blankly ahead, their faces conked and pale. Scientists scrutinized the data on the screens, seemingly oblivious to the suffering of the test subjects. I couldn't help but shudder at the implications of what they were trying to achieve, harnessing psychic powers to breach the barrier between life and death. In the final room, I saw something that will haunt me for the rest of my days. A large cylindrical tank stood in the center of the room, filled with a murky, swirling liquid. As I approached, I could see a figure suspended within, its features obscured by the fluid. The room was filled with the hum of machinery, and I noticed a series of cables connected to the tank, pulsating with energy. As I watched, the liquid began to churn violently, and the figure within seemed to twist and contort unnaturally. Suddenly, the room was filled with an ear-splitting scream, emanating from the tank. The scientists in the room seemed unfazed, scribbling notes and adjusting dials on the equipment. I couldn't bear to watch any longer, and I fled the room, the screams echoing in my mind. These were the horrifying experiments I witnessed within the secret government facility, each one more disturbing than the last. It was clear that they were willing to go to any length that unlocked the secrets of the afterlife, no matter the human cost. A sudden piercing alarm blared through the building. Panic surged through me, and I knew I had to escape. I retraced my steps back to the vent, but hesitated as I heard footsteps approaching. I knew I couldn't risk being seen, so I slipped into the shadows, pressing myself against the cold, unforgiving walls. The sound of the footsteps grew closer, and I held my breath, praying they wouldn't spot me. As the footsteps faded into the distance, I noticed a map of the facility and a wall nearby. I quickly scanned it for an alternate escape road, as falling upon a series of underground tunnels used for waste disposal. It was risky, but it was my best shot at getting out undetected. I located the nearest access point and made my way there, avoiding security cameras and patrols along the way. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a metal grate, which I managed to pry open with a discarded crowbar I found nearby. I descended into the darkness, the stench of decay and chemicals assaulting my senses. The tunnel was narrow and dank, but I crawled through the filth driven by the desperate need to escape. As I made my way through the maze-like tunnels, I heard the muffled sounds of pursuit above me. They were searching for me, but I hoped the tunnels would lead me far enough away from the facility to evade capture. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint light up ahead. It was the exit. I crawled faster, my heart pounding in anticipation. But as I approached the exit, I heard the distant rumble of an approaching vehicle. I had to act quickly. I emerged from the tunnel, finding myself on the edge of the forest. The sounds of pursuit were growing closer, so I scrambled up a nearby tree, concealing myself in the foliage just as a patrol vehicle pulled up to the tunnel exit. The armed men exited the vehicle and began to search the area, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I waited in terror, my heart palming as I clutched the branches, praying they would look up. After a tense few minutes, the men returned to their vehicle, apparently convinced that I had eluded them. The vehicle roared away, and I allowed myself a moment to breathe. Once I was sure they were gone, I climbed down from the tree and began the long, treacherous journey back to my cabin. I moved cautiously through the woods, avoiding the main trails, and using my knowledge of the area to stay hidden. With every step, I felt the weight of what I had discovered bearing down on me, but the fear of being caught propelled me forward. I knew I could never truly be safe. Story 2. I woke up feeling a little disoriented, as if I had been rudely torn from a dream. The sunlight streaming in through my bedroom window seemed oddly bright, but I chalked it up to a restless night. As I stumbled towards the bathroom, the floor felt colder than usual, like a sheet of ice. I told myself it was just another strange quirk of the day, and maybe I should get a rug for the bathroom. Throughout the day, things just didn't feel right. My coffee tasted more bitter than usual, and the newspaper headlines seemed disjointed, like a jumble of words thrown together. I tried to shake it off, lay me on a lack of sleep, but the feeling persisted. At work, I noticed that my colleagues' conversations sounded distant, and the words seemed to lose their meaning as soon as they were spoken. The once familiar office space now felt foreign and detached, as if I was an observer in someone else's life. I could no longer find comfort in my daily routine. As the day wore on, I noticed more and more things that seemed different. My favorite park, which I walked through every day on my way home, had trees I didn't recognize, and a statue that was missing an arm. The faces of the people passing by were unfamiliar, and their expressions were vacant. The world around me felt like a hazy imitation of the life I had known. For months I felt a growing sense of unease. It started subtly with the smallest of changes. The aroma of my morning coffee, once comforting and invigorating, began to fade, replaced by a lingering bitterness. I attributed it to a change in the brand or a new batch of beans, but something in the back of my mind kept nagging me that there was more to it. Gradually, the peculiarities intensified. I found that the music on the radio didn't sound the same, as if the familiar melodies had been altered or the lyrics shifted just enough to be unfamiliar. The paintings and photographs on my wall seemed to change too. Their colors appeared duller, and the images they captured appeared ever so slightly off. I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks on me, but the feeling of unease persisted. Over time, the days grew stranger still. The streets of my hometown, which I had navigated effortlessly for years, began to betray me. I would find myself lost on familiar routes, as if the layout of the roads had been inexplicably altered. Buildings I knew so well seemed to disappear, only to re-emerge days or weeks later in the same spot, as though they had never been gone. The weather patterns, too, were puzzling. The sun would rise and set at odd angles, and the night sky seemed to be missing stars I had gazed at my entire life. The wind carried strange scents, and the air felt thick and heavy, as if it were a tangible presence weighing me down. Over the months, these small oddities began to affect my relationships. Conversations with friends and family became disorienting as they would recall events differently from how I remembered them. Their laughter sounded hollow and their expressions seemed muted, as if they were actors in a play rather than the loved ones I had known for so long. I began to wonder if I was suffering from some kind of mental breakdown. I sought solace in books and articles trying to understand what was happening to me. Despite my efforts, the unsettling changes continued to accumulate like snowflakes piling up on a cold winter's day until my world was almost unrecognizable. I tried to adapt to find some semblance of normalcy in this shifting landscape of my life. I searched for answers, for a way to make sense of the strange, altered reality in which I found myself. But every day, it seemed like the world around me slipped further and further away from the one I used to know. It was on a chilly, overcast morning that I found the first note. The paper was slightly damp from the morning dew, and the ink had blood, making the words appear as if they were trembling. "Wake up. Your family is waiting for you." The words resonated within me, leaving me feeling cold and uneasy, and glanced around, looking for any indication of who could have left the note. But the street was empty, devoid of any signs of life. I tried to dismiss it as a prank, but the note nodded me, its message echoing in my mind. Days passed, and I found another note taped to my door. The words were hastily scrawled as if the writer was desperate for me to understand. "Please wake up. Something isn't right." The feeling of dread in the pit of my stomach grew, and I couldn't shake the sensation that these messages were meant for me. As the weeks went by, the notes appeared with increasing frequency, and their urgency intensified. They began to arrive every few days, each one more desperate than the last. "You'll belong here," one read. "This world isn't real," said another. The messages became more frantic, the handwriting more erratic, as if the person writing them was a child. Soon the notes were appearing daily, the paper often crumpled, and the ink smeared. "Your family needs you," one implored. "Remember who you are," begged another. With each note, the weight of their message bore down on me, making it harder to dismiss them as mere pranks or the work of a disturbed individual. The final note arrived on a stormy night, the rain pounding against my window as if it were trying to break through. The words were written in bold, angry strokes. "Wake up. Your fam aisle away is waiting." It was as if the writer was screaming at me, desperate to make me understand the truth that I had been so reluctant to accept. I could no longer ignore the messages. The notes had become a haunting chorus, a constant reminder of the growing sense of unease that had taken root in my life. The urgency in each message compelled me to search for answers, to find a way to decipher the cryptic warnings and uncover the truth they were trying to convey. Determined to unravel the mystery behind the messages, I began to devote every spare moment to the investigation. I started by confessing my neighborhood, asking my neighbors if they had seen anything suspicious or received similar notes. While some expressed concern, none had experienced anything like the eerie messages that were plaguing me. Unsatisfied with the lack of progress, I decided to invest in a security camera to secretly position it to monitor my front door. Each morning I would review the footage, hoping to catch a glimpse of the note lever in action. The notes continued to appear, but whoever was leading them remained elusive, like a ghost slipping through the shadows. As my search for the truth intensified, I turned to unconventional methods. I consulted with private investigators, mediums, and even a local folklore expert, hoping to glean some insight into the mysterious messages. Each new lead in theory was ultimately a dead end, leaving me feeling more lost and desperate than before. I spent hours in the library and online, scouring articles on psychology, paranormal phenomena, and even alternate realities, searching for any clues that might help me understand what was happening. My investigation led me down many strange paths, from conspiracy theories to tales of supernatural intervention, but no answers were forthcoming. The notes had become an obsession, their urgency driving me into the brink of madness. I started to question my own sanity, wondering if I was creating the messages myself, perhaps during bouts of sleepwalking or some other fugue state. Desperate for answers, I sought out professional help, attending sessions with therapists and psychologists, but their words provided little solace and the mystery remained unsolved. Each new message fueled my determination to find the person behind them, to understand the meaning of their cryptic words, and uncover the hidden truth that seemed just out of reach. As the messages grew more desperate and the weight of their warnings bore down on me, I became consumed by the search, losing myself in the endless pursuit of an answer that always seemed to be just beyond my grasp. My obsession with the notes led me down a path of constant anxiety and restlessness, my mind racing with possibilities and theories. I had become a shadow of my former self, the mystery consuming my every thought. One evening, as I returned home after yet another fruitless day of investigation, I was barely aware of my surroundings, my mind preoccupied with the haunting messages. As I climbed the steps to my apartment, the exhaustion and the emotional turmoil that had been building up inside me finally took their toll. My foot caught on a raised edge, and I stumbled, the world around me suddenly lurching into chaos. Unable to catch myself, I hurled forward, my head colliding with the unforgiving concrete. The pain was sharp and immediate, a searing heat that tore through my skull like a bolt of lightning. And then, in an instant, everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying in a sterile white hospital room. The steady beep of monitors filled the air and the scent of antiseptic stung my nostrils. My body felt heavy and unresponsive, as though I was weighed down by a leading blanket. I struggled to make sense of my surroundings by my default of confusion. My family was gathered around me, their faces etched with relief and love. As they noticed me stirring, their eyes filled with tears of joy. A mother's voice trembled as she whispered, "We thought we lost you. You'd get in a coma for months after a terrible car crash. We didn't know if you'd ever wake up." Their words sent a wave of shock through me. Months lost, trapped within my own mind, living a life that wasn't real. The strange occurrences, the unsettling changes, the cryptic messages. All of it was a manifestation of my unconscious mind, struggling to break free from the prison of my coma. As the truth began to sink in, the memories of the life I left behind started to return. I realized that my journey was far from over. I now faced a long road to recovery, both physically and emotionally. But as I lay there surrounded by love and support of my family, I knew that I was ready to face the challenges ahead and to rebuild the life I had lost. Story 3. The day I discovered the secret room started like any other. I had finally decided to tackle a long overdue task of renovating our basement, which had become a catch-all for the various knickknacks and old possessions we had accumulated over the years. It was a Saturday morning, and I had set aside the entire weekend to clear out the clutter and transform the space into a functional workshop. As I descended the creaky wooden stairs into the dimly lit basement, I took a deep breath and surveyed the task ahead of me. The room was filled with stacks of cardboard boxes, mismatched pieces of furniture, and forgotten memorabilia, all shrouded in a thick layer of dust. I donned my work gloves and decided to start in the farthest corner, where a particularly ominous-looking pile of boxes towered precariously. With a sense of determination, I began sorting through the dusty boxes, separating the items into piles to keep, donate, or discard. The process was slow-going and monotonous, but I found a certain satisfaction in unearthing long-lost treasures and memories hidden within the dusty containers. I was in the midst of sifting through a box of old family photographs when I noticed a faint draft coming from the wall behind me. Intrigued, I set the box aside and began to investigate. The basement walls were constructed of old bricks, and as I ran my hand along the rough surface, I could feel the cool air seeping through the gaps. My fingers eventually found an area where the mortar between the bricks felt different, almost as if it had been deliberately weakened. Curiosity piqued, I carefully pressed against the brick, surprised to find that it moved inward with little resistance. A sense of excitement and trepidation filled me as I realized that there was something hidden behind the wall. As I continued to push, the brick slid back further, creating an opening just large enough for me to peer through. The sight that met my eyes was one I never could have anticipated. An entirely separate chamber lay hidden behind the basement wall, shrouded in darkness and mystery. The urge to explore this hidden space was irresistible, and so with a mixture of excitement and anxiety, I widened the opening and ventured into the secret room that would change my life forever. As I entered the secret chamber, the faint light from the flickering candles cast eerie shadows on the walls, revealing a wealth of chilling and intriguing objects. The walls were adorned with faded murals depicting scenes of sacrifice and reverence, each painting telling a twisted tale of worship and fear. Ancient leather-bound books were scattered haphazardly across the cold stone floor. Their pages, yellowed with age, contained cryptic writings in languages long forgotten, accompanied by macabre illustrations that seemed to come to life as I glanced over them. Among the texts, there were diagrams of elaborate rituals and invocations, as well as depictions of the gods in their terrifying otherworldly forms. A collection of scrolls, parchments, and crude drawings were pinned to the walls, forming an intricate tapestry of arcane knowledge. Some showed maps of the stars and planets, while others detailed the anatomy of both humans and creatures too horrifying to be of this world. It was as if the room had been used as a study and a place of worship by someone deeply immersed in the dark arts. The chamber was filled with an assortment of peculiar artifacts that seemed to hold significant meaning. Obsidian daggers, adorned with jewels and runes, were placed carefully on an altar, alongside chalices encrusted with dried blood. The walls were lined with shelves, and the walls were lined with each one holding a myriad of trinkets and relics that seemed to possess an unsettling energy. From shrunken heads and bones to talismans and amulets made from rare and unusual materials. In one corner of the room stood a massive dust-covered mirror with a gilded frame. The glass was cracked, and it seemed to distort my reflection in a way that made me feel as though I was looking into a parallel, twisted version of reality. The mirror seemed out of place, yet somehow it felt like it belonged there, adding to the room's unsettling ambiance. Despite the disarray, there was an undeniable sense of order to the chaos, as if the room was a carefully constructed labyrinth of knowledge and power, intended to be understood only by its creator. The more I explored the chamber, the more I felt the weight of the secrets it held, and the undeniable presence of the ancient gods, whose influence continued to linger in the darkness. After leaving the secret room, a sense of unease settled over me. My heart raced and my thoughts were consumed by the chilling images of the ancient gods and the cryptic texts that adorn the hidden chamber. I knew I should seal the room away and pretend it never existed, but curiosity gnawed at me, urging me to learn more of the mysterious space. I decided to start by doing some research on the house itself. I spent hours at the local library, digging through old records and newspaper clippings in hopes of finding a clue about the room's origins. My efforts eventually led me to the house's previous owner, a reclusive scholar named Henry J. Morrison, who had been deeply involved in the study of ancient religions and the occult. Feeling more determined than ever, I reached out to the local historical society, hoping to find someone who could shed light on the enigmatic basement chamber. My inquiries piqued the interest of an elderly historian named Margaret, who agreed to visit the house and examine the room firsthand. While waiting for Margaret's visit, I couldn't help but be drawn back to the secret room. I found myself spending hours poring over the ancient texts, examining the artifacts and tracing the intricate symbols on the floor. It was as if the room was calling out to me, urging me to uncover its secrets. When Margaret finally arrived, I led her to the basement and revealed the hidden chamber. Her eyes widened in astonishment, and she immediately began taking notes and photographs, her excitement palpable. As we discussed the room's contents, Margaret shared her knowledge of the ancient gods, the rituals performed in their honor, and the dangers of meddling with their powers. She warned me of the potential consequences of disturbing the sanctity of the chamber, but I couldn't help but feel compelled to understand the room's purpose and the reasons for its concealment. Despite the warnings, I continued to be drawn to the secret room. The more I learned, the more I felt an inexplicable connection to the ancient gods and the dark forces they represented. It wasn't long after I began delving into the mysteries of the secret room that I started to notice a sinister change in my life. At first, it seemed like a string of bad luck, small accidents and inconveniences that I brushed off as mere coincidences. However, as the days went by, the incidents grew more frequent and more disturbing. One day, my best friend called me in a panic, explaining that he had narrowly escaped a devastating car accident. The brakes on his car had mysteriously failed, leaving him careening down a busy street and crashing into a tree. Miraculously, he emerged with only a few scratches, but the experience left him and me shaken. A few days later, I received a call from my brother. He had been hiking in a nearby forest when he slipped and fell, breaking his leg. The incident seemed unusual, as my brother was an experienced hiker and knew the area well. As I sat by his bedside in the hospital, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that soon after, My best friend's daughter was bitten by a venomous spider, an encounter that would typically be rare in our region. She required immediate medical attention and spent several days in the hospital. The fear and pain in her eyes were a haunting sight that left me deeply unsettled. At work, a colleague of mine narrowly avoided a serious injury when a heavy shelf in the storeroom collapsed just moments after she had walked past. The incident left everyone on edge, and I couldn't help but feel responsible in some inexplicable way. As these misfortunes continued to plague the people around me, my own life seemed to be spiraling out of control. I would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of shattering glass, only to discover that the windows in my bedroom had inexplicably cracked. My once thriving garden began to wither and die, and my once healthy pets felt ill without any apparent cause. The nightmares I experienced became more vivid and terrifying. The ancient gods from the hidden chamber seemed to taunt me, their twisted faces leering at me as they whispered dark promises and threats. Each night I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, and the memories of the nightmares lingering in my mind. My relationships with friends and family began to suffer as the horrors continued. I became distant and withdrawn, consumed by the knowledge that something sinister was happening, and I was powerless to stop it. My loved ones expressed concern for my well-being, but I couldn't bring myself to share the truth with them, fearing that they would think I had lost my mind. One evening, after a particularly harrowing day, I sat alone in my living room, staring at the entrance to the basement. I couldn't help but feel that the secret room was the source of the terrible events that had befallen my friends, family, and me. It was as if the ancient gods were punishing me for discovering their hidden sanctuary, and the only way to appease them was to uncover the secrets they held. In the days and weeks that followed, the terrible events that had plagued my life and the lives of those I cared for began to subside. My friends and family regained their health, and their fortune seemed to improve. As for me, I felt that my strength returned and my nightmares ceased. It seemed that the ancient gods had honored their promise. But the weight of my decision weighed heavily on my soul. As the months went by, I began to notice subtle changes in myself. I found that I had a newfound understanding of the ancient texts and rituals that fill the secret room, and I could sense the presence of the gods more acutely than ever before. It was as if they were watching over me, guiding my every move and ensuring that I remained true to my pledge. At times I would receive visions from the gods instructing me to carry out specific tasks or rituals in their honor. These tasks often required a great deal of secrecy and discretion, but I knew that I could not defy the will of the ancient deities to whom I had pledged my loyalty. As I fulfilled my obligations to the gods, I found that my life became increasingly isolated and detached from the world around me. My friends and family began to drift away, unable to understand the transformation that had taken place within me. I too found it difficult to connect with the person I had once been, as the influence of the ancient gods continued to shape my existence. Though the terrible events that had once plagued my life had come to an end, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of loss and regret for the choice I had made. I had saved my loved ones from further suffering, but in doing so I had sacrificed my own moral and eternal self to the ancient gods, who now held dominion over my